Good morning, good morning, good morning. This is your man Marcus, and it just gives me great pleasure to once again present to you Rebuild Live. This is the final session, and we're going to get started in just a second. Uh, so thankful for your being able to join me this morning, and my prayer is that um, whether you're joining me this morning or whether you are watching this on demand, that you are blessed by this. So we're going to go on and get the audio started. Good morning. Good morning. This is Marcus Kyler, and I am so very excited to bring to you the final session of Rebuild Live. I've just been having such a good time this month presenting to you this material. I've been coming to you every Friday at 7 a.m. for this webinar series to introduce my book, which is coming out Tuesday, March 31st, 2015. And this is just something that I wanted to do, to introduce this material and to have you to learn a little bit more about the book and what it's all about. And just so that you can get excited about it with me, I just want to be able to share this excitement with somebody. And also, I want to deliver some kind of value to your life, because the more that I talk about this material, the more that I teach this material, the more that I realize that even though my target audience is pastors who have gone through the experience of burnout, I have begun to learn that uh, this can really apply to anybody in their experience, in whatever you've gone through in your life that was traumatic, that was embarrassing, and it's something that you don't want to deal with, you just want to distance yourself from. There's some kind of recovery that needs to take place in your life. There's some kind of rebuilding that that you either have already gone through, or that you need to go through, or that you're in the process of going through right now. And I believe that this material is relevant to you. So let's just go ahead and get started. So again, I'm Marcus Kyler. For anyone who is watching this for the first time and you haven't been able to watch the other 3 webinars yet, I've been in ministry since 2001. My educational background, I have 2 bachelor's degrees from Morehouse College and from Georgia Tech. I did a dual degree in electrical engineering program while I was down south in school. When I came back from school, from undergrad, I attended seminary. I took the road a little less traveled than my friends who got their engineering degrees. So I came back to Detroit. I went to the Detroit Extension campus of Ashland Theological Seminary, got my Master's of Divinity in 2009. And then as of last year, 2014, in November, I completed my Doctor of Ministry Studies at Ecumenical Theological Seminary in Detroit. I pastored for 5 years in the AME Church, and pastored 2 churches for 5 years, and just had a lot of experience just in those short 5 years of pastoring. Before I became a pastor, I was ordained a deacon at the age of 25 in 2007. In 2008, I became a pastor in Windsor, Ontario, Canada, which is for us right across the border from Detroit. I became a pastor at 26, so I was the youngest in my district to be a pastor at the time. In 2009, I was ordained an elder, so I became a pastor before I became an elder. It doesn't necessarily happen every day, but fast forward a couple years later, in 2011, I was appointed the youngest presiding elder in in the African Methodist Episcopal Church at the age of 29. I served in that capacity for 1 year before the bishop decided to transfer me to a church in Flint, Michigan. And that's where I was for the 2012-2013 conference year. And that church is where I suffered my burnout and where I ended up leaving pastoral ministry after that 1 year. And that is what much of the book and much of my doctoral studies is about. In 2014, I successfully defended my doctoral dissertation entitled Building Community Through Social Media to Tackle Pastoral Burnout. And if you see the link on your screen, that is the abstract to my research project. So you can take a look at that if you want to. I was also interviewed on a podcast about, I guess about a couple months ago now, called the Social Media Church Podcast, and a link to that is also there. And then now here we are in 2015. I am publishing my first book entitled Rebuild, and it is coming out next Tuesday. I'm just so very excited about that. The entire title of the book is Rebuild, a 12-part framework for rejuvenating and restoring the burnt out pastor. And we are focusing on recovering from burnout in pastoral ministry and moving forward with life. So what we're doing is we are answering both the why and the what now of pastoral burnout. Rebuild, the book has 4 lessons or 4 units, and I'm teaching 4 lessons in this Rebuild Live webinar series from the 4 units of this book. And each of these units is an area of our lives that needs to be rebuilt after the experience of burnout. The first is rebuilding the psyche, rebuilding the psyche, and that involves coming to grips with what's happened and just being able to process the burnout that's taken place and figuring out from there what to do with how you feel. And the next is rebuilding the foundation, rebuilding your foundation. And that involves remembering who you are, the essence of who you are outside of your position. Because if you can get back to who you are outside of, before you became a pastor, and the essence of just who you are as a human being without the title, without the role, without the collar, without all of that, then that can help you to begin to put the pieces of your life back together again. The third unit, the third aspect that needs to be rebuilt is rebuilding your faith. And that involves rekindling your love for and your faith in Christ. And finally, what we're going to be talking about today is rebuild your life. Rebuild your life. And that involves resuming a productive, God-glorifying life, whether that is inside or outside of full-time vocational ministry. You may or may not become a pastor again after you have suffered burnout in ministry. And I am of the belief that is okay, just as long as you are still productive in society. And I believe that we absolutely can be, because God is not through with us yet. So those are the 4 units, and just a very quick recap of where we've been this month. On the 6th of this month, we talked about rebuilding the psyche, and the lesson that we talked about was that of timing. This particular lesson really had to do with trying to discern whether or not it was time for you to leave. I'm hoping that some pastors who may be on the verge of burnout, but who have not made that decision to leave ministry yet, would pick up this book, and they would be able to look at this chapter. That's why this is the first chapter. Before we can even begin to rebuild anything, we need to make sure that it's God's will for you to step down, and the lesson in Joshua helps us with that. And a long story short, Joshua's timing as the leader of the Israelites helped them to avert danger as they were doing what they needed to do to overtake the promised land that was given to them. And the relevance there was that as burnt out pastors, our spirits are no longer strong, and we tend to trend towards self-reliance, making our situation worse. And so when we consider timing, and when we decide that we're not going to make rash decisions, then we concentrate on seeking God and seeing what God has to say about our situation before we do anything. And sometimes that can make all the difference. But we're not necessarily always thinking in that mind frame when we are going through burnout. Sometimes our reliance on God is not what it needs to be when we're going through that experience, because our spirits are so messed up. And so so that lesson of timing is the first thing. And then you can see the link there for the session 1 replay. That's at rebuildthebook.com/live1, LIVE, and the number 1. On the 13th, we talked about rebuilding the foundation, and the lesson there was one on balance, coming from Matthew 23, 1-12. And Jesus was criticizing the scribes and the Pharisees because they had so much of an emphasis on titles and positions and being seen doing good that they didn't. They were concentrating so much on being seen doing good that they weren't actually living or practicing in private what they were trying to preach in public. And Jesus was really calling them out for that. And that's relevant because in ministry we put so much emphasis on titles and positions in ministry that we no longer know who we are outside of the pulpit, and therefore we suffer identity crisis at the point of burnout and resignation. Because if we burn out and we resign from ministry, then we think, wow, who am I now? Where am I going? Because this was my entire identity. So it's very important that we balance our lives with things that don't have anything to do with ministry. Ministry is such a big part of who we are, but we still have to balance our lives with hobbies, with recreational activities, and with things that are not related to ministry, so that we can again rediscover the essence of who we are. And so the session 2 replay is at rebuildthebook.com/live, LIVE, and the number 2. And what we covered last week on the 20th of March, we talked about rebuilding your faith, and we talked about lessons coming from Proverbs 3:11 and 12. And the relevance of that scripture is that we cannot avoid or shun correction or discipline in our lives, because when we are disciplined by God and when we are corrected by the situations that we go through, then that means that God is not through with us yet. And correction is very necessary for our growth and our development. And we must be able to pull out the lessons from everything that we have gone through in life. Whether we think that we were in a situation where we were wronged, there was still something that we could have done better. And even though it's painful, there's something that we can still take out of the situation. And we talked last week about harmful congregational coalitions. I pray that you will go back and look at the session 3 replay of the webinar when we talked about harmful congregational coalitions. And we don't want to let our anger with those people who were part of those harmful congregational coalitions stunt our growth and keep us from learning what it is that we needed to learn and take away from the valley experience that we had. We have to learn from those situations, and we do so by committing to take lessons away from anything that we go through. And so that replay is at rebuildthebook.com/live, LIVE, and the number 3. And so for the rest of our time, I just want to teach on the lesson on this morning: rebuild your life. Rebuild your life. This is where we're really putting our lives back together again, and we are really starting to get to the point where we can re-engage um, in society, and we can really go back to um, living life the way that God has called us to live it. Prayerfully, by this point, we have grown in some areas, and we're now ready to really live again. And so we're talking about rebuild your life, and this teaching is on story. So what are we talking about here? So when we're talking about rebuilding your life, we are talking about that which empowers you to live a productive, God-glorifying life post burnout. And so again, this lesson is from Matthew 27:3 through 5. And actually, for your hearing, I'm going to read verses 1 through 6, but the focus is on 3 through 5. Starting at verse 1, when morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people conferred together against Jesus in order to bring about his death. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor. When Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he repented and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. Verse 4, he said, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. But they said, what is that to us? See to it yourself. Throwing down the pieces of silver in the temple, he departed, and he went and hanged himself. But the chief priests, taking the pieces of silver, said, it is not lawful to put them into the treasury, since they are blood money. And so in this text, Judas and Peter, and actually we're not even talking about Peter specifically in this text, but if I were to go back and get the scripture from Peter that coincides with this, that we would see that Judas and Peter both betrayed Jesus in their own way. Peter denied Jesus 3 times, publicly disavowing any association with him when people asked about him. And Judas betrayed Jesus, of course, by exposing Jesus to people who were trying to capture him, and they didn't know who he was. They didn't know what Jesus looked like, but they just knew that they were trying to capture him. And Judas exposed Jesus with a kiss and allowed those men to capture him. And he did all that for 30 pieces of silver, which, as we see in verse 6 of this text, was something that ended up being worthless. Judas ended up realizing that those 30 pieces of silver didn't mean anything, and that that was just worthless. And in verse 6, the men who gave Judas the silver for exposing Jesus, it was worthless to them as well, because, like they said, it was blood money. So Judas did all that for something that ended up being worthless in the end. So both disciples did wrong, and both were actually very remorseful. But only one of them lived past that remorse, and therefore we only remember one betrayer. If you look in scripture, and if you look at any kind of teaching on this text, we only see Judas being called a betrayer. We never see Peter being called one, even though Peter kind of let Jesus hang out to dry. He kind of distanced himself from him, and so, but Peter was not only remorseful, but he came back from that situation to do some very great things in ministry. And so we don't remember Peter as much for denying Christ 3 times, but we remember Judas for what he did, because he took his own life and he allowed his story to end right there. The main idea here is that we're often remembered for what we do in our lowest moments, but we have more control over those moments than we think. We ourselves can choose whether we're remembered for that moment specifically, or for how we came back after that moment, for what we did after that moment to redeem ourselves and to put our lives back together. The application here is that pastoral burnout is traumatic. It's embarrassing, and it's just something that we want to distance ourselves from. But the burnout experience is only final if we give up on it in the midst of it. You rebuild your life after burnout by taking control of your story and shaping it the way that you want it to, so that God can get the glory out of what you've been through. And that is exactly what Peter did and what Judas did not do. And that's why we remember these two disciples differently. By first of all, mustering up the courage to tell your story. And secondly, telling it the way that you want to. You're being proactive and taking control of your life and dropping that victim's mentality Satan wants us to hang on to. So I just want to encourage you to tell your story and don't let it tell you. And my heart for you is that my heart for every pastor is that he or she remains in ministry, if at all possible. But if you decide that you need to leave or you've already left, I believe that I have the tools from the experience that from what I've been through and from what God has given me. I believe I have the tools to help you, just as God has helped me and is still helping me. And if you pick up a copy of this book, you'll see that my work is still a work in progress. I don't write this book as a guru, but I write it as somebody who's walking this path with you that just happens to have a little bit of insight about going through the recovery experience. So just a little bit more about Rebuild. There are 12 chapters in this book, 12 focal areas for the pastor in the rebuilding process. We are rebuilding to a place of usefulness and vitality in the kingdom, whether back in full-time vocational ministry or not. And the way that the book is laid out, every chapter is laid out the same way. It starts with a biblical reference, and then we have some moments of theological reflection based on that biblical reference. And then that is followed by practical application of the text and of the concept that we're introducing in the chapter. And then the chapter ends with devotional points. And under these devotional points, we are reflecting, we are reading, and then we are praying. We're reflecting in that we are taking points to think about and questions that we need to ask ourselves as we get ready to pray. And then in reading, we are considering related resources. Most of them are Christian, some of them are secular, that relate to the concept that we're talking about in that particular chapter. And then finally, we're praying. We're doing two things. And I have a hashtag here, because if you go on social media and you type in the hashtag pray for your pastor, you type that in on Twitter, you type that in on Instagram. Those are the two that take advantage of the hashtag more than the other networks. You do that, and you'll find all kinds of things. You'll find all kinds of statistics about burnout in pastoral ministry and about how pastors need prayer. And my purpose for that is it is my prayer, and that lay people also read this book and they can see how they need to pray for their pastor, and of how hard the job of pastoral ministry is, and of how much better and how much more effective their ministries can be once committed and powerful lay people. Because I believe there is so much power in the pews, and if you as lay people begin to pray for your pastors, then I think that pastors will be much better off knowing that they have your support. How much more powerful can ministry be when your pastor knows that you are behind him or her? And then finally, under pray is my prayer for you. So it is my personal prayer that I have written down for you, the burnt out pastor, at the end of every single chapter. And so this book is available on Amazon. It will be available in the Amazon marketplace beginning March 31st. That is coming up on Tuesday. And I just want to be very specific about how we're going to do this. It is going to be available on Kindle. It's going to be available first on Kindle beginning on March 31st. And I want as many people to buy the Kindle as possible. And if you were intending on buying the paperback will be available mid to late April. There's some logistical things that need to take place before we can make the paperback available in a way that's going to be professional, in a way that's that's going to be representative of me and of God, and doing it in excellence. In order to do that, I need to delay the paperback release just for a few weeks. But I want as many people to buy the Kindle as possible. And if you were intending on buying just the paperback, I would still very much appreciate if you actually bought the Kindle version. But if that's a problem for you, let's talk personally, because I want to accommodate everybody, but I do want as many people as possible to buy the Kindle version, because that is going to help me in some sales goals that I'm trying to reach with this book. I want to be an Amazon bestseller in this category. I think that is something very significant, and that's something that's going to help me to get this book in the hands of more people, and something that's going to help to take this message of life after burnout forward. And so if buying the Kindle version is going to be a problem for you, and you just want the paperback version, let's talk personally, and I want to work something out with you, to where we might be able to do some kind of discount with the paperback if you can buy the Kindle. I haven't necessarily worked that out yet, but we can work together to do that, because I want to get that in as many hands as possible. And so for more information, I would very much appreciate it if you visited rebuildthebook.com, and sign up for the mailing list. It is down at the bottom of the website for additional launch information, and to be notified when the book is released, and you can go and purchase it at that point, but you'll be able to be notified when that happens. Or to make it easier, I would definitely appreciate it if you did this. Text REBUILD to 38470. Again, text REBUILD to 38470 to also be on the mailing list, and also to receive an alert once the book has come out. And then you'll also get a link to where you can just go straight to the sales page, where you can make the purchase and you can begin reading. Just so very excited about that. So I pray that you can text REBUILD to 38470. Again, text REBUILD to 38470. This has been a great month. This has been a very busy month, just being able to try to get everything off the ground. Marketing this book, finishing this book, trying to get it edited, and trying to get it ready for release. And this has also been exciting for me to present this material to you in the form of these webinars. And I just pray that this has been a blessing to you. I just want to leave you now with the few minutes that I have left with just an excerpt from the book. And this is from the chapter that we did our lesson on this morning. So I'm going to leave you with just a few words. I know my decision to leave, how and when I did, will always be viewed by many as that of a young man who was wet behind the ears and decided to quit because it got too hard. I used to get upset about that characterization, but I don't anymore, because I have the power and the ability to tell my story the way I want to. I'm taking control of my story and reshaping it for God's glory. I'm reshaping my story from something horrific to something hopeful. I'm reshaping my story from something painful to something promising. I'm reshaping my story from one that dwells on the negative to one that accentuates the positive. I'm reshaping my story by no longer approaching it as a series of "they did this to me and it was horrible" anecdotes, and instead looking at it from I went through this, but I'm stronger, wiser, and better now because of it point of view. When we can begin to shift our perspective about what we've been through in this way, we can begin the process of rebuilding our lives after burnout. There's victory on the other side of defeat, joy on the other side of pain, and sunshine after rain. But we have to embrace the process, take control of our story, and assume sound stewardship over it to realize that other side. And once we do so, our lives can begin to take off again. So again, I just thank you so very much. I just pray that that was a blessing to you. I just pray that everything you've heard this morning is a blessing to you. And I just ask that in the coming days that you will be in prayer with me. I know that this is a very audacious task, and I just want to spread this message that there is life after pastoral burnout. Thank you very much, and God bless you.